Hello students, I'm Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS at Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course, Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In today's lecture, we'll discuss about the idea of consent, the idea of media, and the idea of power of media to create consent. So in essence, we'll understand how consent emerges through a particular way of telling a story or a particular narrative shaping, and how media is not neutral in this. So we will also discuss how consent or hegemony is created historically and it is not natural. One of the ways through which it is done is what we had started off with this course about the idea of nation, the idea of nationalism, the idea of print publics and print capitalism. So to recap it, national imageries, as the way Benedict Anderson spoke about, is very clearly about how a nation is imagined as a common platform for all the people who are living inside the territory. But it is not natural. Because it is not natural, so a certain form of national consciousness is created through the print capitalism, and newspapers can drive particular narratives. And because newspapers drive particular narratives, so our newspapers are significant in the shaping of any idea of a particular nation. Television also does the same thing, because while there is news media, particularly print news media, not everybody is interested in reading, or not everybody can read. Now, if not everybody cannot read, that means the easiest way to communicate something is by showing them. Now, when I say showing them, visual medium becomes significant here, as visual mediums blend information, entertainment, and persuasion. That means it shows how does an ideal citizen look like. It shows who is a true believer. It shows how a true believer behaves, and when it does so, it does it by relying on certain well-crafted visual narratives. A visual narrative that is not well-crafted cannot bring an emotional collectivity. We all respond to emotional imaging. One of the images could be that of a tattered Indian tricolor. What imagery does that create? An imagery of a slum, an imagery of tattered clothes, an imagery of a grand building, an imagery of the grand Himalayas. Each one of this is a way through which information is blended with entertainment and persuasion. As well as what this kind of narrative building does is that it creates a certain form of citizen who also is a consumer who wants to consume more and more of a certain national sentiment. So what television does is that in the simplest of forms, it tells you who you are or who you ought to be, and currently how you must behave. So emotional connectivity is something that we need to look at if we want to understand visual materials and how visuals create the hegemony and how visuals are used to create hegemony. The second aspect is that of digital media, because what digital media does is that unlike newspapers, unlike TV, these are not mediated through editorship. You are your own editor. Even the advertisements that are shown to you, they are also highly local. What does that mean? It means that the companies who are running digital media, they are looking at your preferences as a consumer. What is it that you are searching? What is it that you are buying? What is it that you want to see? What are the search terms? What is it that you are saving on your computer, on your laptop, on your mobile devices, anything and everything in between? So this way, digital media creates a highly localized environment through which digital communication works, but at the same time, the personalization is also about creating a collective. Now, this collective is not the collective of the bygone era or the Fordist kind of collective. This collective is about clubbing different groups of people as different consumers. So while the Fordist model had one specific aspect, the current digital media takes away and creates these micro units to whom it directly speaks to, depending on your search algorithm. And while it is doing so, in a way it is also transforming the entire structure of flow of information and how it is being created and how it is being used. But when we say, or when we make such a strong argument that digital media is more democratic than that of traditional media, we have to understand two significant aspects. One is that even if information has been democratized, general masses, general public usually doesn't have the critical information through which some of the propaganda is being funneled. So what does that mean? It means that what we call as digital divide. This supposedly glass ceiling divides groups of people or a very significant small number of people who have the most important information. This information could be related to economy, could be related to defense, could be related to politics, could be related to anything and everything in between. And the biggest mass of people who are either consumers or the very few who identify themselves as producers, they have some information, they have certain way of looking at that information, but they are a very insignificant minority. Some could say that they are also a significant minority. So here we have one minority which has all the critical information. Here there is another small minority which also has some amount of information, whereas the vast majority of people are only consumers of information because they are not looking at it critically. They do not have the information to address something that is critical for their lives and livelihoods. So public sphere in this matter is more about consumption of information rather than producers of this kind of informations, which are actually significant. So this kind of group that I discussed, they are the ones who work out at different aspects and different kinds of propaganda. So this kind of propaganda is also about media ownership. Earlier in the Indian context, we had one channel called Doordarshan. It was the only media that we had. In terms of telephone, we had BSNL. In terms of internet provider, we had VSNL. Then came different kind of private media owners. But while in 1990 there is a possibility that there are 5 of them currently, these 5 of them are owned by either 2 individuals or 1 individual. So when all the media is virtually owned by one family or a group of people who are closely linked to each other, that means they determine what needs to be shown, what need not be shown. And if that is the case, then what happens is that only a small group of people and their ideas, their views become acceptable viewpoints. In other words, either you are with us or against us. If you're not speaking a particular language, a particular tone, you're outside this boundary, or you'll be thrown outside this boundary. If you're not speaking about somebody, be that a person, be that a place, be that a region, and as we'll discuss in the next lecture, be that an animal, the propaganda model does not work. And editors have fairly understood that money comes from advertisements, and the biggest advertiser happens to be Government of India and the respective state governments. So it is better that we accept the reality and we do not speak truth to power. That is where media ownership in terms of news media becomes extremely critical, because then even journalists internalize the structural constraints and power structures, and they consent to the production of a certain kind of news or certain kind of views in the idea of a particular idea of news. So this is where the hegemony and domination is struggling to find a place, because if it is the hegemony, that means there is a certain form of persuasion that is happening, but persuasion of whom and how? So as we discussed in terms of digital media, now that most of traditional media is owned by 1 or 2 families, digital media has become a platform to share your views, your news that is being edited out by the private and government owned news channels. So this is a way through which hegemony is not complete. Rather, hegemony is being continuously contested over and over again. So manipulated consciousness is also about emotionality and how the ideology is being propagated through certain visions of and certain posters of the emotion. What kind of emotions are projected as truthful and what kind of emotions have been projected as not truthful or simply some kind of desires? What kind of realities are being projected? And this hyper reality is interesting for us to understand, because what we see here is a manufacturing of consent in which certain symbols or certain public symbols are being used and utilized for creation of obedience or for normalizing obedience. One example that I can give you is that of mushrooming of numerous reality shows on the TV. Think about the number of reality shows. You have reality shows regarding quiz question, you have reality shows regarding dance performances, you have reality show for how much you can shout at each other. You have reality shows for singing. You have reality shows for reality shows. So what we find here is an enormous number of reality shows which are creating a certain form of reality or hyper-reality in which it is manipulated, it is manufactured, but it is projected as if this is real. This is how 10 people behave with each other if they are living inside a house. So, normalization is something that is being done over and over and over again to create a certain form of common sense. News anchors come and shout at the top of their lungs in the prime time TV news, and then you compare it with the way it is being done in some of the European contexts where nobody shouts. So this is not to say that what the Europeans are doing is better than what we are doing. Rather, this is to say that what is being normalized. Both the news anchors and journalists and editors would be doing exactly the same thing. One is shouting, another is not shouting. So this is where our consciousness is being manipulated by popular culture, by news media, as well as the way we understand ideology as an unconscious desire. But this is not all bad the way we have been discussing it, because during the colonial and post-colonial period, media has always been controlled. It is not that it is happening only now. Media was controlled during the colonial period, media was controlled during the pre-colonial period, media is controlled in the post-colonial period. And media censorship is one of the key tools to move any argument or to move any narrative forward. Why? Because the moment media starts speaking truth to power, the people in power would lose it. So media and the ownership pattern of media, both during colonial and post-colonial period, is to create unified and monopolistic media control. Before 1990, it was about Doordarshan. Post 1990, it is about private media controlled and owned by 2-3 families. So they would not like you and me to get the information as to what is happening and how it is happening or any alternative viewpoint. So what we need to understand here is that while during the colonial period, we had a certain form of media control which could be highly repressive. In the post-independence period or in the post-colonial period, it is about the less of coercion and more of making them understand that if you do not speak truth to us or about us, both of us are going to benefit. And this both of us means the media owners and the people in power rather than the citizens of this country. So that is the reason why consumerism has emerged as a political identity. And liberalization has intensified this market logic very, very significantly. But does that mean that audience doesn't have any agency? As we discussed in the case of Stuart Hall and his critique of the Frankfurt School, what we witness is that people have agency. That is the reason why there are so many the new content creators on social media, whether it is YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or any other place, who are trying to challenge the mainstream or the mainstream media the narratives of what is happening or messaging. This is where the audience have their agency, and this is where they're trying to resist. Yes, there could be certain form of drawbacks in this, because what is resistance today could become the participant tomorrow, but the participants of tomorrow could become again the resistance makers in the future. So the audience, in other words, audience are not neutral either. Audience are not anybody's fool. And when they consent for something, they are careful what they are consenting to. Then when they are consenting to something, it's not that they are being made a fool. Rather, they consent to knowing very well what they are consenting to. So agency is very significant here. And when we understand that audience has an agency and the way they are using this agency, we would know and we can document as researchers at general public how audience reaction happen and how this audience reaction can be studied and understood. So the media also creates something called worthy and unworthy victims, so on and so forth. So we have already discussed this, so I will not get much into it, because in the last class I had discussed about Vietnam, about many other wars that America fights, and how it is represented as worthy and unworthy. So in essence, what we can say is that media creates surveillance, surveillance creates media. So both are in cahoot with each other. But when political reality is represented, it is represented through certain symbols, certain segmentations. And as students of political sociology, our job is to be careful and use our reason and rationality to understand how it is being done and why it is being done. When we understand that, we know the problematic, we know how somebody is reacting and how this reaction is being captured. So there are a few references that you can identify and read. Thank you.